Hi, my love. So, before we jump into this episode, I just wanted to say hi. I love you. I hope you're having a good week so far. I hope that you have encountered so many blessings and so many wonderful things that have shown you that you are so deserving of everything positive in life. You are deserving of love. You are deserving of wellness. You are deserving of peace. You are deserving of joy. And if nobody has told you today, I love you. Okay? That's why I say it so much. You're probably like, "Mom, are you talking about you love it?" It's like, no, I do. I really do. From the bottom of my heart. And I am so blessed that you are listening today. And I hope that today's topic will really be something that resonates with you in ways that you never thought it could. Honestly, this is just the intro, you guys. As you know, like, we got some good stuff brewing. Okay, last week we talked all about boundaries, and we talk about boundaries again, okay? Because if you listened all the way through, we didn't finish. Boundaries is pretty hefty stuff, okay? Like, it is really juicy and full of important nuggets that we really need to be trying to grab hold of today. So, we're about to jump right in, okay? But yeah, this is part 2 of a 2-parter series. So if you didn't get to listen to part 1, run it back, go check out part 1, and then come right back over here and join us for part 2 of our discussion on boundaries. So where did we leave off? We were talking all about how to apply boundaries and stick to them. Because a lot of times, right, like, we don't really have much of a fight to put up when it comes to knowing how important boundaries are, when it comes to understanding, at least very like basic, at a basic level, what boundaries are. And maybe, there are varying types of boundaries that, we didn't really know about, that now we can put, some words and categories and ideas to. But for the most part, boundaries is not the convincing of needing them. It's just, once I realize I need them, like, how do I apply them and how do I stick to them? Like, what's going on the inside of me that is making it so difficult for me to stick to my boundaries? So that's where we left off. But let's be very clear, there's so much more in store for you guys within this boundary episode. We're in part 2, so I'm glad that you guys are back to have this discussion with me, and we're really going to get into some really good dialogue about this topic. So I kind of went over a couple of things in part 1. We talked, like I said, about what a boundary is, and so I want to go back. Right? What is a boundary? It is, at its basic level, a line that marks the limit of an area, okay? And the American Psychological Association has let us know that a boundary is defined as a psychological demarcation that protects the integrity of an individual or group, or that helps the person or group set realistic limits on participation in a relationship or activity. So we already really dived into what that means, how some of us don't even realize that we have the power, the ability to choose to do something like this. But in reality, in real life, when something is valuable to you, you protect it. When something is meaningful to you, you put a boundary around it. You limit the access of that valuable thing to people that are deserving or that have, unlimited access or whatever. But you get to choose that. And that's a very powerful and beautiful thing. So, I want to make sure, okay, because, this is part 2, but all the rules still apply, okay? So you guys better make sure you're sharing, and subscribing this episode and all the episodes with your friends, your family members, your uncles, your cousin, literally every single person that you can think of that you believe this message would resonate with, that needs some help with boundaries. So that means this episode needs to get 1,000,000 shares, because I know we all know one person. And that person knows one person, and that person knows one person. We struggle with this, whether it is that we have too few boundaries or we have too strong or too strict of boundaries. So definitely make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to the podcast, and send this out to someone you care about so that they can get the gems and the nuggets that are going to be dropped in today's episode. Um, the other thing, you guys, we are in our relationship series, Relationship Cornerstones. These cornerstones are helping us to build the foundation of what we need to be successful in a relationship, and build on top of that thing in order to grow and have healthy, flourishing relationships. So we're building our foundation of what has to be in place in order for a healthy relationship dynamic. And we're building on top of that as we progress through the series. So today's relationship cornerstone is boundaries. Last week's relationship cornerstone was also boundaries, because what is this? It's part two of two. So that is where we're at in the series. And then the only thing left to discuss is our little disclaimer. Okay? I need you guys to listen up, pull up close to the monitor, to the iPad, to the headphones, to wherever you're listening to me in. Okay? I need you to hear me when I say this. And look, let's take all the funnies away. This is serious, because as much as I'm going to give you all of the information, all of the education, put you on game, the gems, everything that will be helpful and insightful to you to build this foundation so that you can be ready for relationships. You're never going to be ready if you haven't done the work on yourself. So no matter how many gems that I drop, no matter how many articles I quote, no matter how many journal entries you write about these topics in the relationship series, you need to do the work on you. This series is about the work that we do in relationship to others. You need to do work on yourself, okay? And if you haven't, you need to go check out episodes 1 through 11, skim through some of the titles, see if anything looks like it could be helpful to you, and decide whether that is something that you need to spend some more time in. You may even want to go and seek out therapy or anything that would be helpful to you to get to where you need to get to on an individual level before you even get ready to tackle these relationship dynamics, okay? Because a lot of times we're just upset. Why isn't my relationship working out? Why isn't my friendship working out? Why isn't this job, business working out? But at the core of all of those things are issues that we are trying to navigate within our own lives, within our own personal character traits, within our own personal, healing journey that just we keep sweeping under the rug. So I'm never going to encourage you to take all this information before you go and do the work on yourself. So that is our disclaimer. It's a very important one. I don't like to brush by it. I know I have in other scenarios, but today that's not what we're doing. All right, so I feel like I've gotten this all up to speed. We've got our anchor definition to give us context as to what we're talking about when it comes to boundaries. Go back and listen to part 1 so you can really get a sense of some of the just general themes that are popping up in this entire discussion. But now, you guys, I really want to go ahead and just jump right in. Let's talk about what you need to do to apply and stick to these boundaries, okay? So the first thing is that you really need to know who you are, okay? You need to know who you are. I need to know who Kenny Ray is, okay? You need to know who you are. She needs to know who she is, and he needs to know who he is. You need to know. And the reason I am putting an emphasis on this is if you've been listening to any of the other Relationship Cornerstone episodes, you will probably notice a pattern of the first step, or maybe the second step, being know who the other person is, okay? Because again, we're not In our foundational series, episodes 1 through 11, working on ourselves, we are working on our interactions with others. And so, yes, there is a heavy emphasis on making sure you know who is on the other side of the table. Who are you trying to get into a relationship with? But this, my friends, this is going to require you to focus on you. Okay, doesn't mean that you don't take into account other people, right? We had an episode, a relationship cornerstone episode on understanding. Sometimes it is important to attempt to understand where the other person is coming from, where they're at, and use compassion and empathy and just, try to really meet them where they are. Um, but that is only through using discernment, and we emphasize that in that episode, right? Um, but here, I'm not going to advise that, right? Because I am going to assume that you listen to our understanding episode and you're not selfish and you're not self centered and you are someone who is well rounded and capable of using discernment while also knowing what you require, okay? What, who are you and what do you require? Um, that's really key to setting your boundaries. Who am I and what do I require? And I think within this, who am I? A lot of times, we feel like we don't need boundaries because we're like, oh, everything's fine right now. But the reality is, I was starting to talk more about this in some later episodes, is the aspirational self is just as important as the current self, right? Because we all have this person who we're aspiring to become, or at least we should. We all are working towards various goals, whether that be in love, relationships, finance, work, child rearing. Um, we are all working towards a better version of ourselves, or at least we should be. Because if not, then why are you listening to this podcast? Because that's literally all we talk about. We are all trying to improve. We are all trying to better ourselves. We are all trying to get to a place of just reaching our goals, reaching our dreams, and having the community we desire, having the life we desire. We want to wake up, we want to look up, and we want to feel just nourished and revitalized by what we have surrounding us, not just within ourselves, but because of everything that's surrounding us, because of the family, the loved ones, the job, the money, the car. We want to feel nourished and revitalized through external things as well as internal things. It can't just be us having this internal peace, joy, happiness, and then everything around us is miserable and chaotic. We want eventually, if it's miserable and chaotic for now, we understand that may be for a reason and a season, but we eventually want to come out of that place from an external standpoint and get into, a space that is really going to also pour back into us and allow us to live healthy, holistic, flourishing lives. Um, and so that is kind of the context around the aspirational self, the person that you are aspiring to become on a regular basis, and really understanding, yes, who you are in the present, but who that person is. And I say aspirational self because it's not just one or two goals, it's a whole picture of things. You want to have a large group of friends, you want to be married, you want to have kids, you want to have a job, well, hopefully you want to have a job. Or maybe you don't want to have a job. Maybe you just want to have passive income. Whatever that life looks like, you need to have a real strong sense of what that is as well. And I'm really saying that not just for fun and because it sounds good, but because that's literally what the boundaries are going to help you protect. Yes, you are protecting your current self, but you're also putting a fence around this additional high value aspirational self, right? You may, because some of us, we're struggling to place value on our current selves. And while you should, you are beautiful and valuable in the current state that you're in, whether that's the best state you've ever been in or the lowest. But sometimes it's so hard for us to protect that because we just don't feel like it's good enough yet. Okay. And I am here to tell you that it is already good enough. You are enough. But if it helps you in any way to see the importance of really putting boundaries and really protecting the your space, your interactions and your engagements and your attachments with other people, it's in addition to your current self, the aspirational self, the value in the person you know you are becoming, that you see or become, that you believe you are becoming. And that can be challenging, I know. But you can do things to motivate yourself. Go back to our foundational series. You can do things to motivate yourself to really curate a sense of self-worth in your present self and in your future self. So know who you are, know who that aspirational self is. What are you working towards? And then you're going to need to identify, this is step 2, identify the subject person, the subject scenario, or the subject environment, right? Because sometimes we put up boundaries and we think that it applies to everything and everyone, or sometimes we put up boundaries and we feel like, yes, I have boundaries within my friendships, but no boundaries at work, or I have boundaries um, within my work relationships, but no boundaries within my romantic partnerships. And that's not good. Like, all areas of your life deserve to be evaluated because they're all valuable. Every single last one of them deserve to be evaluated. And so you need to identify what those compartments are for you. They may not look the same as they look for you as they do for me. Maybe mine are, you know, my coworkers. So it might not just be you need boundaries for work. You might need specific boundaries for your coworkers. It depends. It depends on where you work. I don't know. Maybe you work remote and so you don't even have that. But maybe you have to go into a construction site every day and people make crude remarks about women or crude jokes about, someone who is struggling. So you need to identify, and within that, maybe it's the environment, but it could also be a specific person at your job. So you have to know. That's why I say you have to know you have to know your current environment and your aspirational self. It's very important. So identifying these areas in your life that you need some awareness, need some intentionality, and potentially need boundaries. And then step 3 is you're going to want to sit and reflect on how the subject, person, scenario, or environment make you feel. Okay. It's just hard because I feel like oftentimes the reason why we struggle is because this is the thing we're trying to escape. We're trying to escape the reality of how this person, place, or thing makes us feel. And that I understand wholeheartedly. But the reality is find a safe space, get alone, get a journal, get with God, get into a safe space, and sit with how these things make you feel. And as you're scanning through your memories, scanning through your days, scanning through your weekend, thinking about the different things that you did and the different feelings that amassed as you were going throughout your day, you need to take note of that. Some of this stuff is going to really require you guys to journal. I know people are not the biggest fans of journaling, but some of this is really going to require that you sit and you write some of this stuff down, even if it's just for tactile memory purposes, so that you can really get your thoughts out. Um, but how did it make you feel when your boss came in and told you you're not working hard enough, even though you've been giving 12 hours of work to the job Monday through Friday and sometimes Saturday? How did that make you feel? How did it make you feel when your friend told you that little business idea that you have is silly? How did it make you feel? How did it make you feel when you walked into a big room full of people and no one acknowledged you? But this was supposed to be a community event with your friends and people that you have known for years. How did that make you feel? Bringing some awareness to what is going on in your everyday life. This is not something you have to do every day. You just need to do it up until the point where you covered the majority of the primary people, environments, and scenarios that occur on a regular basis in your life. Okay. And so, I think that was step three, right? So, oh, and then I want to add to that, right? In reflecting on how these things make you feel, make sure that you are clear that it's not just about whether you're receiving good feelings in these moments. Um, it's not always about, because sometimes good feelings have to be have need to have boundaries as well, right? And a lot of times, right, that looks like us putting our own boundaries into play. But it's also okay to let your friend know, like, hey, I'm working on this, so I'm setting a boundary for me, and I would like for you to help me to maintain it. So, for example, like, there's nothing wrong with going out and partying and even getting drunk with your friends from time to time if that's your thing. But maybe your boundary is, hey, I'm only gonna do this once every month. I have a job now, I have kids, I have a husband. I can't go out and turn up like I used to. And if your friends are 7 day a weekers or even 4 day a weekers, or even every week, and you're like, no, I can only make it once a month now. Like, that is you putting a boundary on something that makes you feel good. So this is where we start talking more so about discipline. But it's not always about the things that make you feel bad. So just keep that in mind. But you do need to make sure you bring some awareness to the feelings. All right. So step four is that what you are going to do is assess these feelings alongside any natural responses or reactionary behaviors that occur and weigh this against your aspirational self, right? So we talked about the aspirational self. That's important. You got to have that. Put it in a reservoir, do your reflections, and then you're going to come back and merge the reflections with everything else that's going on. And so the feeling that you are experiencing, you're going to reflect on that, obviously, but you need to make sure that you've also paid attention and assessed any responses and reactions that you may have. Does your heart speed up? Do you feel sad? Are you really excited? Do you lose a little bit of self-control in the moment? Are you ready to pop off? Did you pop off? What happens after you've understood the underlying feeling? What happens? And then as you are kind of and sometimes nothing happens, and that's okay too. But just in case, you want to make sure you include that into your assessment. And then just make sure, as you're kind of bringing some awareness to what happens, you're allowing yourself to say, wait a minute, that's not okay. Like, me reacting like that, me feeling this way, me having anxiety, my skin starting to, get hot and my hands clammy, that's not okay. But maybe it is okay. Maybe you're having this reaction because you're nervous, but it's good nervous because you're about to give a big speech. And it's a room full of people who are skeptical of you, but that's okay because you're going to wow them with the big speech. And so having that bodily reaction is okay. But this is what I mean. It's really sitting down, taking the time, bringing that awareness to the space, and assessing your reactionary behaviors, taking off the ones that are fine, no big deal, this is cool, this is not problematic, to my aspirational self, right? That's what we're weighing it against. Are these reactionary responses, are these feelings, reactionary behaviors, and responses problematic in the furtherance of my aspirational self? How do they make me feel in the moment? How am I feeling in general? Is this good for me? And because sometimes we feel like we can handle it in the present. This is why I said the aspirational self is important. Because where are you trying to go? What are you trying to improve upon? Who are you trying to become in the next 6 months? And if these feelings, responses, and behaviors that are reactionary to these people, scenarios, and environments are not conducive to your aspirational self, that is the number one way to know that you need to set a boundary. Okay? That's how you know. That's literally how you know. And then once you have determined, I need to set a boundary, then you get to go into the candy store, right? And we had in episode 1 a long list of the different boundaries. We've got physical boundaries, we have sexual boundaries, we have material and financial boundaries, we have emotional boundaries, we have time boundaries, and I believe that's all. I think I named them all. Physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, emotional boundaries, material and financial boundaries, and time boundaries. So, and maybe you have determined that there's more than just this group as well, and that's fine. But then you pick which one, pick which boundary that is going to work. And look, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, boundaries will be shifting and also a little bit of trial and error. So just go ahead and pick something that you feel fits this particular situation that you're trying to, limit access to. Okay. And once you've done that, now you just need to be intentional, right? The second to last step is be intentional. Write that boundary down. In order for me to lose 25 pounds, in order for me to be the 25-pound lighter version of myself, my aspirational goal, my aspirational self is 25 pounds lighter. In order for this to happen, I can no longer do bottomless brunch with the girls on Sunday. Okay? I can meet you for coffee. I can meet you for dinner where they got salads. And y'all don't want to hear this because this sounds awful. But look, if you're trying to reach that aspirational self and you say to yourself that aspirational self is 25 pounds lighter, then you've got to cancel bottomless brunch. Especially if you're struggling, right? Like, I guess there are some people who can sit at brunch, order a water and something small and not do the most. But most of us can't do that. So if you know that's you, then that's gotta be your boundary. You can meet up with the girls for some other time. Or, hey girls, do you mind switching our weekly outing from bottomless brunch to just a fun lunch meetup or a fun Sunday dinner where I can get something a little bit healthier off the menu, And maybe they're not willing to do that. So look, you're going to figure it out. Trial and error. Sometimes you shift the boundaries. Sometimes people aren't okay with your boundaries. And then you have to use discernment on how you want to navigate those scenarios and interactions based upon how they respond to your boundaries. Okay. But yes, be intentional. Write these boundaries down. Journal them. Or if you don't want to journal, write it on a postcard, write it on a Post-it note, put it in your phone notes. Okay, you need to have a tangible visual thing to commit yourself to, or else you're just not going to do it. You literally aren't going to do it. You're going to write it down and you're going to forget that we even had this whole thing. So write it down. And another way to hold yourself accountable for these boundaries is to tell someone. Okay, if you've decided that you're no longer, because you want long-lasting, healthy, romantic partnership, you are no longer going to allow someone to call you at 12 a.m. midnight and ask to come over. Not only are you not going to let them come over, but now your boundary is you're not even going to pick up the phone. And in fact, when they make that call to you at 12 a.m. and then a follow-up text asking to come over, you don't respond until the next day, wherein you tell them, please do not message me that late at night. It makes me uncomfortable. And if you would like to have a productive, engaging relationship with me, I would much prefer that you reach out to me prior to 12 o'clock midnight. And that sounds crazy to a lot of y'all. This is where we start getting into the conversations of people, men, women, others, attacking and saying, oh, you doing too much, you bougie, you this, you that. Look, if that is the response you get, kick those people to the curb. Kick them to the curb. because they will have all sorts of boundaries and respect and whatever for themselves. But let you have some, they don't want you to have them. That means because they want you to take your value away, because they only have currency for that can be spent at the Dollar Tree, right? They don't have the emotional currency to afford you, is what I'm trying to get at. They don't. They do not have the emotional currency to afford your value. And so they're trying to get you to lower your prices, okay? They're trying to get you to lower your prices so they can have access to you. And I'm telling you, don't do it. There will be someone else, there will be another situation, another thing. There will be something that will come along that has the black card to your heart. I promise. Okay? All right. And so then after bringing some intentionality to it, letting someone know who can hold you accountable, maybe practice with someone safe, practice some of those boundaries with someone safe, and even practice with yourself. So practice some of the things that you're going to say. Look, it sounds crazy, but the mirror is your best friend, because who's in the mirror? You're your best friend. Practice in the mirror. Practice what you're going to say. Practice a different you, just audibly speaking some of those things that you were always so afraid to speak, speaking some of those boundaries that you were always so afraid to share and implement. That's going to be huge for you. And then, of course, you'll apply it in real life. That's the very last step. So I hope that you guys will take all of these steps and really, hold them to your heart, because these are important. They're meaningful, and they really, 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 really work, I promise, in terms of getting you to start to navigate life with more self-esteem and avoiding toxic. Now, some people are just really sneaky and really chaotic. And so this is not to excuse their behaviors, but this will definitely help you to avoid a lot of toxic situations. And also know, like with the example from part one about my job, just know that everything and everyone is not deserving of a boundary. And sometimes you just have to let things go. Sometimes you just have to let people, places, and things go. Sometimes it is time to move on. Be prayerful about that, depending on what it is, and just trust God is going to lead you in the right direction. But sometimes you absolutely just have to go ahead and let that thing go. Okay. So one thing I also want to share with you guys, that I think is so important for this conversation on boundaries, is that you don't have to isolate yourself in order to have boundaries. A lot of times, like, I'm giving you all this information, it feels like a lot. You're like, I'm gonna cut everyone off and you get away from me because I'm working on myself, and that's beautiful. But note that this entire series is about relationships. Okay, so this is not me telling you to go isolate yourself so that you can figure all this stuff out and put up the boundaries you need and then shut everyone out until they figure out how to do right by you. That's not what's happening here. Obviously, sometimes God will isolate you to work on you, but let Him do that. Let God place you in that time of isolation. Don't just run from people, even if you don't have the best people in your life. And notice I said the best. I'm not saying that you have toxic people in your life. If you have toxic people in your life, you need to run, you need to throw them away, you need to move to another state, another city. Like, I don't know your situation, but you don't need to be around toxic people. But if you don't have the best people in your life, that is not the end of the world. If you are working on yourself, aligning yourself spiritually, God will remove the people that no longer need to be in your life. And in terms of getting to a place where you can focus on yourself, you need to be able to manage both. You need to be able to manage working on yourself while also allowing people to be in your life. And navigating those relationships, because even if those people end up not being in your life for the long run, those are the people that you're going to end up being able to kind of practice and navigate and try to see, like, okay, why isn't this working, and I'm putting up boundaries and you're not respecting them and I need to pull back. And so I hope this is making sense to you guys, but just know that You don't have to isolate yourself. And the reason why I want to highlight that is because community is really important. Community is important, and that's why this relationship series is important. It's because we need people. As humans, we were created to be social. We were created to form bonds and connections with other humans. And so, if you have a trusted community of people who truly care for you and really love you and pour into you, that is like the highest boundary, in fact, I believe that you can set, is to not only focus on building that trusted community, but also to um, prioritize that trusted community. I'm going to pour into this. Like, I might actually need to leave work a little bit earlier because I need to go and support my friend who just lost their parent. Because this is my trusted community friend. This is my trusted friend. This is my dear friend who pours into me. And so now I need to pour into her. And so navigating the dynamics of a beautiful relationship with people who you can trust and who love you and who are part of a really solid community is one of the highest ways that you can incorporate healthy boundaries. Um, and again, I keep saying trusted because that's the key. Like, you trust them. That's not in question. They're not bad for you. They're not bringing you down. You're not misaligned, in certain areas. You all are focusing on love and peace and have some similar goals in life. So, anyway, that's another story that we're going to dive into when we get into our friendship episode, which is later to come in the relationship series. But yes, just last but not least, with that whole don't isolate yourself, is focusing on that aspirational self. Remember, that's kind of the key here, is the aspirational self isn't just me focusing on me. Like, the aspirational self is literally when you close your eyes, like the life that you envision. And hopefully, if you're listening to this series, you're listening to it because you believe that it includes relationships. And so if you believe that that aspirational future beautiful vision of yourself includes relationships, working on yourself requires you to foster relationships and be working and putting time and effort and energy into relationships. And you have to use discernment now, okay? Because you can't just be putting energy into dead relationships. You need to be praying and asking God to remove people from your life that are not beneficial to your growth and your aspirational self. But again, that's the whole point of this episode. We are putting up boundaries as well to make sure that we're only putting energy into relationships that are truly going to be mutually beneficial for our aspirational self. So don't isolate, don't self-isolate. God will do the isolation for you. One of the things I also wanted to share with you guys is in this topic of boundaries that has come up a couple of times, the reality of having boundaries, but also being too guarded. A lot of these conversations are kind of targeted towards the people pleasers, the people that really struggle to put up boundaries in the first place. And that's literally why you're here, because you don't even know what a boundary looks like, what it is, or why we do it. Like, this is stupid, this is silly, like boundaries for why. Which is why I had to kind of go into all of that in the beginning. But this, I want to make sure I emphasize also for those of us, or those of y'all, because it ain't me. Well, it can be me in some settings, right? And so maybe that's the case for you too. Maybe, like I said, you have loose boundaries in one topic, but in another, you are really, really guarded. And I just want to make sure that I clarify that having loose boundaries is obviously unhealthy and unhelpful, but having boundaries that are so rigid, so high, the wall, you have a wall, you're so guarded, that's not good either. That's not good. Honestly, unhealthy boundaries are unhealthy no matter which way they fall on the spectrum. We're always looking for balance, right? So if you go too rigid, it's unhealthy. If you go too loose, it's unhealthy. We want to stay far away from extremes and get into a space in the middle that really has balance, that is going to bring us, um, the ultimate or the optimal health out of that relationship and that boundary. Rigid boundaries literally keep other people at a distance, even loved ones. And you don't want that. You don't want everybody to be at a distance. And you might say, yes, I do. But I promise you, baby, that is a defense mechanism. That is something that is going on on the inside of you that probably needs some healing and some work and some attention. And I promise that with just a little bit of reflection, thought, intentionality, you don't have to push people away like that. Okay? If you are refusing to talk about your emotions, that's okay. But you have to know that in order to foster mutually beneficial relationships, people are probably going to want that emotional side of you to start to come out, to be more vulnerable, to be a little bit more open, a little at a time. And you're going to have to know what those triggers are, or those things are that you need to see in order to continue to open up that access and to allow that access to increase for the various people. Um, so I think that the article that I read, I believe, had a few, I guess, explanations, right, for why some people create rigid boundaries, and sometimes soft boundaries too. They are the reason why we do this. So I wanted to kind of read some of these off for you, and they give some context as well. So I wanted to go and just dive into that for a bit, because I think that a lot of times we just assume that this is okay because it's just how it always has been. And I want to make sure I shout out the article. It's helpguide.org. I've been reading from it, for the entire episode for the most part, of course with my own dialogue. But I definitely want to make sure I shout this article out. It's called Setting Healthy Boundaries in Relationships from helpguide.org by Sheldon Reed. And so I'm down at the bottom of the article where it talks about why we struggle to have balanced boundaries, and why, people have rigid boundaries or just are too guarded. And there are several reasons. One is a desire for control. Some people use boundaries to manipulate others. For example, a person might use rigid boundaries to stonewall conversations, refusing to engage with you until you do what they want. Now, a lot of us who have been in relationships where individuals on the other side of the relationship were narcissistic are going to relate to this, okay? Unfortunately, there are people in this world who are unhealed and exhibit traits of narcissistic personality disorder that are not diagnosed formally. And a lot of times the stonewalling of the conversation is a product or an example of ways that they attempt to exert control over the other individual. But I just wanted to make sure that I share that with you guys, because I think at some point I might want to dive into the topic of narcissism in a later episode, much later down the road. So for anybody that's going through something like that, I definitely want to just kind of shout you guys out and send you love. But the reality is, a desire for control is not always an indicator of narcissism. So just know that a person, you specifically, might have a desire for control and use boundaries in order to manipulate other people. Like, I'm not going to talk to you until you do this thing, or until you say that I'm allowed to do this. And if that's you, I'm not saying you're narcissist, that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that that could be why you have really rigid boundaries, is you have an unnecessarily high desire for control. And you might want to kind of sit with yourself to try to understand why that is, because controlling another person or controlling a situation, especially when it's not something that is your responsibility to control, is definitely not healthy. And so you don't want to walk into relationships with a desire to control them. Um, so, anyway, the next is a fear of rejection. So, if you're afraid of a romantic partner walking out of your life because of your flaws, you might hesitate to be emotionally open with them. Okay, so you have a guard up, you have a wall, you're extra guarded, you have a boundary. Like, I have an emotional boundary that's way too high. I'm not going to be vulnerable. I'm not going to open up because I'm afraid that you're going to leave me just like everyone else did in my life. We come across that a lot, I feel. Um, People are starting to open up and talk more openly about being abandoned and their fear of rejection, which is good, but it's definitely not an excuse. And it's not an excuse to behave like this and not be emotionally open. If that's something that you're struggling with, a fear of rejection or a fear of abandonment, you need to work that out within yourself, and more than likely through therapy. Um, Next, a lack of experience with setting limitations. Okay, so now we're back with some of the soft people as well, right? Because that was actually really my thing. I grew up in a manner where I just had no autonomy over my life. Like, my mom just told me everything that I had to do. If I wanted to do this, no, there was just, I had no autonomy. And I think to some degree it is important as a parent to kind of make all the decisions for your child, especially when they're young. But I mean, it's like I didn't have any autonomy over my body, what I wanted to wear, how I wanted to style my hair. Like, I just had very little. So it kind of taught me that I couldn't, like, I had to let people do whatever they wanted to do to me because I just was not allowed to do anything for myself that I really wanted. And so if I wanted to do something, I had to swallow that frustration, or the fear or the offense or the difficult emotions that I was dealing with. And so I had that's how I entered. I'm just kind of going on a little diatribe about how I entered into the people pleasing space, right? So I just wanted to make sure I shared that with you guys, just in case we have any fellow people pleasers listening. But I know this particular area that we're talking on is leaning more on the guarded people, but it's also the same. Like, if you have a lack of experiences in setting limitations, this might be something that is really challenging for you because you don't know how to set a boundary, and so you just set the highest ones. You never saw people who set boundaries. Maybe they set really poor boundaries, and so because they had no boundaries, now you're like, I'm gonna set super high ones. I'm gonna have, a steel iron gate of boundaries. So that could be the case because you just didn't have those examples or experiences. And you might have some low self-esteem. You might feel as if your needs and wants aren't worth vocalizing, or you feel that your self esteem is only validated by how high you set your boundaries. So, instead of the people pleasing side of having low self esteem, your self esteem is so low that the only way that you feel good about yourself is to have these super rigid high boundaries. And we talked about how in the first part, having boundaries can help to kind of establish self-esteem, which is good because it can help to establish it, but it doesn't create your self-esteem. So just keep that in mind and know that you're allowed to have high self-esteem without being overly guarded, unnecessarily guarded in a manner that shuts everything and everyone out. That's just not good. Okay. Um, I'm really excited about this because this is the section that I have come to love the most about the podcast, where we talk about Jesus. And I didn't know that this podcast originally was going to incorporate my Christianity, but I've been led by the Holy Spirit to do so. Time and time again, I'm actually really excited because I think that boundaries are biblical. Okay, that is the kind of one and the two and the three. Boundaries are biblical, you guys. Okay, boundaries are biblical. And a lot of times people in the faith feel pretty lost because we have so many verses that tell us about being kind and to turn the other cheek and all of these things about being meek and loving and patient and all of that. And all of those verses are true. Okay, they're all true. But I'm going to break a couple things down for you, right? And I want to start off with Jesus himself. It is John 2:24 through 25. And the verse says, "But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knows what was in each person's heart." And I love this because it's Jesus, right? But just want to insert that as a believer, if you are a believer, you have access to the discernment and the wisdom of God, of Jesus, of God, and you can ask for it. There are plenty of verses that talk about being able to ask God for his wisdom, ask God for his discernment. I've quoted them in previous episodes. I did not provide any today, but know that if you ever need discernment, if you ever need God's wisdom in terms of knowing what is in someone's heart, he will give it to you, okay? But I love this because it's literally talking about how Jesus didn't trust them. Now, for context on exactly what Jesus is doing, I would need to go and look into the rest of the chapter. And I kind of want to do that really quick because I want to know what it was that he was untrusting about with these individuals. I know that this was kind of after his first miracle, the second John. Oh, right. Okay. So this is interesting. I should have read for you 20 John 2:23 through 25. So I'll just read verse 23. It just says, "Now while Jesus was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name." So this is great. I'm glad I did this for context because this is right after Jesus' first miracle. He turned the water into wine. And I think he also like went to the temple and did some other things. But he's like performing all these miracles, and just imagine like an Instagram influencer. Like that's kind of how I would imagine Jesus at first, like coming into this space, and people being like super skeptical, but then other people being like, "Oh my God, this is crazy," and like running around with their camera phones trying to record him and be his follower, like literally clicking follow on IG because they're like, "Oh, this is amazing." But the reality is, this verse is telling us that Jesus didn't trust them because he knew what was in their heart. Because a lot of times people are fickle and they really are just following to see what you're doing, and that they don't have hearts that are truly yearning after Christ, yearning after the truth of the Father, which is actually very fascinating because if you study more about Jesus and his life, you'll know that he only had 12 disciples. But this verse kind of gives you a reality that he had probably more than 12 people that wanted to follow him, but he actually only asked a certain 12. And it was probably because of the difference, but of what was in their heart versus these other random people that just saw him doing all this stuff and decided that they wanted to come and follow him. So I'm not, here to say that Jesus is only, saying who and who can't follow him, but there has to be a certain limitation, a boundary, a certain requirement, and that is something that is discussed, particularly in the New Testament, about how you come into the knowledge of Jesus Christ and salvation and your heart posture and the importance of that. And those individuals with a certain heart posture and a certain faith are able to become followers of Christ, but not everybody becomes a follower of Christ. Just because you are running around following behind him, excited about his miracles, doesn't mean you become a follower of Christ. And so he didn't trust these guys, and he put that boundary up right there, which is very interesting. All right, and so Ephesians 5:6 through 10 says, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not become partners with them, for at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. And this is another wonderful verse or passage, Ephesians 5, 6, and 10. And, I don't really have a lot to add to that. I mean, it just says it pretty straightforwardly. Be careful of empty words, okay? But it says also a boundary that you have to set. It's literally giving us a boundary. The Bible is full of boundaries that we have to set. But this is one specifically when it comes to being in relationship with others. It says, therefore, do not become partners with them. And this is people who deceive us with empty words. People that deceive us with empty words sounds a lot like my last relationship. And so I'm sure if I read this verse, things might have been different. But the reality is, you have to be careful. And I'm very glad, right? I'm glad and grateful for the experience that was that relationship. But I'm very grateful to God that I didn't marry this man, because the word is literally telling me it's okay that these people exist. We're not telling you that you can't be nice to them or shake their hand or love them through the love of Jesus, but you cannot become partners with these people. And this is not him even talking about people who are just full of evil. The verse is talking about let no one deceive you with empty words. Do you understand what empty words means? Empty words are people that say a whole lot and do a whole lot of nothing. Empty words are people that say a whole lot and do a whole lot of nothing. This could be from anything to, they make you a promise and they don't come through, to just they say that they're this and they're really not. They say that they love the Lord. They say that they work out, and you have never watched them open their Bible outside of the church that, you guys go to. You've never really seen them work out outside of the times that you push them to the gym. This is what this verse is saying. Obviously, there are other scenarios of people who are going to be classified as sons of disobedience. But he's literally saying, do not be deceived by people with empty words. And he's literally giving us this context because I believe that God knows that it's easy for us to attach ourselves to these people, to become partners, whether it be in business, friendship, or romantic partnership. It's easy for us to attach ourselves to people who deceive us with empty words. It's very easy for us to do that. But we have to be careful. We have to use discernment, and we have to use God's wisdom in order to understand that these deceivers with empty words is enough for us to put up a boundary and say, no, I'm not going to enter into relationship with you. I'm going to love you from a distance. I'm going to put up a boundary and pray for you. Okay? So I definitely wanted to make sure that you guys understand that as much as the Bible calls us to love, it calls us to be peaceful. It calls us to have patience. The Bible is literally telling us not to become in partnership with people who can deceive us with empty words and the so on and so forth, with all sorts of evil things that people are capable of. God doesn't want us in partnership with those people, okay? So never believe that, obviously marriage is different. Once you've tied that knot, the Bible has a different set of rules and regulations for how to stay in a marriage and what your responsibilities are. But outside of the context of marriage, when it comes to business, when it comes to friendship, when it comes to dating, okay, you don't have to stay in relationship with people that are sons of disobedience, that are not following the principles of the Holy Spirit, that are problematic in their faith walk, and also are deceivers with empty words. Okay, so put up that boundary. Now, the last verse I wanted to share is 1 John 4:1. It says, "Dear friends, do not believe everyone who claims to speak by the Spirit. You must test them to see if the Spirit they have comes from God." Okay? I love this verse because it's literally another verse telling us to put up a boundary within the context of people. And again, I feel like we as Christians, we hear this turn the other cheek verse and we don't get that we're allowed to put up a boundary. We are literally allowed to say, absolutely not. I see you. I don't really understand you fully, but I'm not going to let you all the way in. I'm not going to give you full access. I'm going to test you. This doesn't mean play games. Test is a term of art in the Bible. It does not mean that it gives you a license to play games, but you can put up a boundary, ask those questions, allow things to play out, see who people are for who they are. Okay, don't believe every spirit. Don't believe everything that feels good. Oh, the energy is so good and we just connected like that. Oh, the energy just feels right and their business feels so in alignment with mine. Do not believe every spirit. Test it and see if it comes from God or not. Okay? Pray, ask for discernment, and rely on the Holy Spirit to lead you and guide you in the right direction in navigating these different interactions. So, I just wanted to make sure that I harped on that for you because, again, if you grew up in the Christian faith like I did, you heard turn the other cheek so many times. And so you believe that when someone slaps you, you're just supposed to allow them to slap you again. But what God was, or Jesus was trying to say in that verse is to allow yourself to move with loving kindness, okay? Loving kindness. That means that you're not, if they slap you, that you don't go and punch them back, that you don't go and slap them back. No, look, God is a God of forgiveness now. So if you gotta slap somebody, I'm not judging you. But I can't, okay? But the reality is, turn the other cheek is about kindness. Turn the other cheek is about loving them with the love of Christ. But it doesn't mean that you stay in a relationship, a friendship, or a business partnership with someone who is acting that way, okay? Who slapped you. You don't have to stay in a relationship with a person that slapped you because these people are evil. It actually says that in the verse right before the turn the other cheek portion of the verse is talking about don't be so quick to run away from evil people. But this is not saying to run away, not run away in the context of relationships. It's saying that you can deal with an evil person. You can deal with them in love and you can deal with them in kindness. Don't just run. Deal with them in love. Deal with them in kindness. Don't slap them back. Deal with them in love. Deal with them in kindness. But put up that boundary. Absolutely not. We're not going to be business partners. We're not going to be best friends. We're not going to be sharing a bed together. Okay, so I just want to make sure I make that clear for all my lovely Christians who are out here struggling with boundaries as I have for so many years. And I hope that this really resonated with you and helped you in so many ways. So to summarize both part 1 and part 2, I just want to make sure that I wrap it all up with a nice bow. A boundary is a line of demarcation that limits access to an area. And so there are various types of boundaries we learned about, and sticking to them can be real tricky, okay? I know it is. But the best way to start is to know yourself from the inside and out. You need to know yourself and know your aspirational self and bring some awareness to your feelings in different environments and around different people, noting any unreasonable reactions and things like that. And sometimes you might have an unreasonable reaction, okay, or a phobia or a delusion, and that may require some therapy, okay? That's what I said. A boundary can't fix everything. Depends on where you're at in life and where you're at with yourself. That's why know thyself is the number one rule. But we also learn that boundaries are just really helpful to us in general because they help guide us through interactions with others, and they help others be guided through interactions with us. And it really helps us to require from others treatment that helps us to be and stay our best selves and to get to that aspirational self that we talked about. Be careful not to have too loose or too rigid boundaries. You need to find that balance because either extreme is unhealthy. And know that God is literally championing for you to have boundaries. He wants you to have them. He really does. God wants you to have boundaries. He wants you to lean on Him for wisdom and discernment. Turn to Him for that insight so that you can reach your purpose and fulfill the calling He has on your life. Okay? So put those boundaries in place. All right? Okay, guys. Well, that's part 2 of the boundaries relationship cornerstone episode. I loved this one. This is really healing for me in a lot of ways. I talk to myself in these episodes, really and seriously. I talk to myself as much as I'm talking to you. So I hope that something resonated with you, that you can take, that you can share with someone you love and care about. Honestly, you guys, we are just getting started. We've got one more relationship cornerstone episode left. I am not going to tell you what it is. I'm not going to reveal what it is, but I pray that you love it because it's going to be a doozy in a good way. All right, guys, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on whatever you're listening to this podcast on. Help someone else by getting this podcast, giving this podcast some love so that more people can hear it, more people can see it, be confronted with it, and start unlocking their best self, and their journey to wellness can be championed on by all of us, and we can really bring them into the fold. Okay. You guys, that's all for this episode. I love you, and I will talk with you next week. Bye.